to make sure that all of our board members have the resources they need in order to best lead their communities. So with that said, for tonight's Master Speaker Series event, we have More Than Maintenance, learn the steps to properly identify, plan, and execute a successful HOA reconstruction. Our presenters for this evening are Adam Maldonado, Texas Regional Vice President with Reconstruction Experts. We have Alyssa Lorch, Senior Account Manager with Reconstruction Experts, and Ethan McKee, Texas Division Manager with SPSA. The overarching topics of today's discussions are how to properly identify the need, plan for project commencement, and execute that project successfully. As always, the format for this evening will be a joint presentation between our Reconstruction Experts and SPSA. We will allocate some time at the end for question and answers. So like always, if you have any questions that come up throughout the evening, please chat them to me, Matt Kopchak, and I will bring them up either when contextually appropriate or at the end, because we will save some time. We will also keep this presentation to an hour like we have for past events. So thank you all. And I'm going to hand it over to Adam, Ethan, and Alyssa.
Great, thank you so much. All right. I'm going to share my screen here, so just give me a second. Okay. Well, thank you, Matt. Like Matt said, my name is Alyssa. I'm the Senior Account Manager for Reconstruction Experts here in Texas. We just wanted to give you a really brief overview of our companies before we get started, and just say thank you so much for your time. We're really excited to be talking with you all tonight, and we're really looking forward to some of the questions that we get to answer at the end. Of course, we would love to do this in person. Our presentations are a little bit more interactive usually, so just bear with us here as we go through this on the webinar. So really quick, a little bit about Reconstruction Experts. We are a general contractor with an in-house roofing division, and we specialize in HOA reconstruction. So literally all we do is work in communities just like yours, and we've been doing that for almost 20 years now. So we do have 7 offices in 4 states, and our 2 biggest markets are actually Colorado and Texas. So we've got multiple offices in each state with full staffs, and we've worked with many worth-for-us communities in each state. So I'm going to turn it over to Ethan really quick to talk a little bit about SPSA.
Thanks, Alyssa. My name is Ethan McKee. I'm the Division Manager for the Texas branch of SPSA. We have offices in Texas, Colorado, and in Idaho. And we have about 45 architects, engineers, construction managers, and other specialists. And we, like RE, specialize in serving community associations. We have managed over $400 million worth of repair projects for community associations.
So our title of our presentation is called More Than Maintenance, as Matt said, and our presentation is broken out into 2 basic parts. The first part is project planning, and the second part is project implementation. So we know that working in an occupied HOA environment is very, very different than any other kind of reconstruction project. And that's because we're working where people live. So special considerations need to be made to do this successfully, and we're going to talk about what those are. So for project planning, we're going to deep dive into how to determine if an issue at your community is more than a maintenance issue, and what to do if you do have an issue that's more than maintenance. And then in project implementation, we're going to jump into proper project supervision in an occupied environment, and then how the engineer can provide value throughout the construction process. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam to go ahead and get us started on project planning.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. As Matt and Alyssa mentioned, my name is Adam Maldonado, and I appreciate everybody's time. We're going to talk a little bit about more than maintenance, but I think that in order to talk about what is more than maintenance, it's important to establish what is really considered maintenance. And when we work with associations and we look at what we consider maintenance items, these are often considered things like landscaping, gutter cleaning, kind of small general painting projects, small sealant and joint replacement projects, even kind of routine HVAC maintenance and inspections, pool maintenance. These are all kind of routine and general maintenance things that that should be handled and, through a maintenance action. We've also included what we refer to as a maintenance checklist. And this is meant to be really a kind of a checklist of items that need to be maintained for any community, whether it's annually or seasonally or quarterly. I think that as you guys manage your associations, I'm sure you've seen these types of checklists and understand the importance of managing and maintaining all of the critical components of your communities. So I think it's good to kind of just establish that baseline of what is maintenance. And now we can kind of jump into a little bit more of what is more than maintenance. So as we try to determine issues that may be more than maintenance, there are several key indicators that we think are valuable in making those determinations. And the first is if you have a reoccurring issue. And this is likely to be an issue that maybe has been observed, that's been repaired, there's been some maintenance effort put towards it, but it just keeps coming back. So this could be a window leak, this could be stucco cracking, this could be a roof leak, any number of things that tend to come back over and over again, or that show up with similar conditions in multiple areas throughout your community. Those are things that we would consider to be reoccurring and may in fact require more than a maintenance type repair. Another key indicator is having multiple trades. So if you've got a repair issue that is going to include or require a mason, carpenter, electrician, multiple different types of contractors all working to solve the same problem, that is likely to be more than just a maintenance issue. Another key indicator is the complex logistics. When I talk about complex logistics, I'm talking about things that are going to specifically impact your residents, such as access requirements, whether that's going to be utilizing swing stages or scaffolding or impacting resident traffic patterns, or anything that's going to have a significant impact on how the project is implemented that has the larger potential to impact your residents. And then we also think it's important to consider the warranty requirements when considering if an item is maintenance or more than maintenance. With a lot of the general maintenance type of repairs that we see, they don't come with as robust or as thorough of a warranty. So if you're making a repair, looking to make a repair in your community, and you think it's really important that we have a good warranty for that, it's likely to be more than a maintenance item. So if you've identified an issue that needs to be repaired, and you think that it's likely to be more than maintenance, what should you do and what should you not do? At this stage, a lot of times the problem or the issue has been identified, but it hasn't been really vetted to the point that you understand exactly what's causing the problem or what that specific repair is going to be. So you've identified a problem, but you don't have a thorough, detailed plan on how to address it. So at this stage, what you do not want to do is to send that problem out to bid to multiple contractors until you have more understanding. And we've got an example on the screen here that this is a real example that we received from a property manager. And I'll just read it very quickly, but it says, I have a property and I need to get some bids ASAP. The bids I need are gutter repair, fixing loose siding. We need to get this work done right away, so please let me know when I can get your estimate. That is all of the information that was provided. Now, we understand this. We understand that as board members, you're not experts always in what it takes to maintain these properties or repair them when needed. And even property managers are often not experts in each aspect of what that building maintenance needs to be. So we understand how these things happen. But in this particular situation, these are two actual bids that came back for the scope of work that was identified. The low bid was just over $5,000. The high bid was nearly $350,000. So with that big of a swing between the bids, it's really hard to make a determination as to which direction should, the association would want to go in. And we understand that this can also be frustrating to you as board members and to your property managers when you're trying to get issues addressed and make good decisions. So how does this happen? There are a couple of key things that we think are really important to determine to avoid this type of scenario as you're working through this process. And so number one is that issue did not have a well-defined repair scope. They said fix gutters and fix loose siding, but they didn't really identify how that was going to be done. There were no quantities or locations, so we didn't know if there were going to be one location or a dozen locations. There was no defined materials or specifications, so we didn't understand what needed to be done or what those materials that would be replaced would be like. And of course, no planned logistics. So all of this has resulted in no project plan and bids that are generally not very helpful to you as board members or to the association to make decisions on how to actually address this problem. So how do you actually develop a good plan for something that is more than maintenance? We've really boiled it down to 3 basic steps. And the first step in these situations is to hire your project team. And I'm going to let Ethan talk a little bit about what that step entails.
Thanks, Adam. I think at this point, it should be obvious why you would want a contractor on your team when you're engaging in a repair project. What may be less obvious is the role an engineer will play. And there are times when the city will require building permits or other sort of documentation to permit a job. And things that will sort of trigger the need for an engineer would be structural foundation issues, retaining walls that are over a certain height, issues dealing with firewall issues between two occupied spaces, things like that. Also, when you do have, as we talked about a few slides ago, sort of complex building systems sort of working together, it's a good time to bring an architect or engineer on board where they can sort of deal with the system as a whole. When you're bringing your team together, one thing that we've found is that it's really important to have the designer and the contractor in together with the association as soon as possible, so that there can be as much collaboration on the approach that's going to be taken, and the design that's going to be implemented as possible.
So moving from step 1 into step 2, once you've got your team hired, you've got your trusted engineer and your trusted contractor working in collaboration together, what we want that team to really develop is going to be scope development. So this is really developing what that repair plan is going to be that's going to solve the issue, make that repair effectively, also while we're staying within the budget of the association. So at this step, you would clearly diagnose what that problem is going to be and then define that repair scope within that budget.
And once the scope has been determined and we've figured out what needs to get done, one of the big values of an engineer or architect is the drawings. These are we consider them construction documents, and they are contract documents. They carry legal weight, and they serve to clearly define what's going to be done and where. And it's a tool, a useful tool to identify and get everything approved by all parties before things really get underway. It's a good way for the association, the contractor, all parties involved to be protected as much as possible. One thing that we are asked quite often is, what's the difference between an engineer report and an engineer design? And to sort of boil it down, it's basically an engineer report is when an engineer comes to your property and does an investigation into what's going on, what's the cause of the issue that you're experiencing. Whereas a design is a much more specific, in-depth, complete sort of instructions for what to do to actually fix your exact issue. An engineered design is what the building department will require for complicated projects and can be used in the permitting process, whereas a report is just a general sort of, it will have some basic recommendations for what needs to be done, but those are not recommendations that are developed enough to be used for the permitting process or for the bid process either. So here's an example of some of the recommendations that are made on an engineer report versus an engineer design, just to give you sort of a visual of the sort of difference between the two. An engineer report, and these are pulled from SPSA projects. The sort of repair recommendations part of one of our engineering reports has sort of a bullet point list of general things that are going to need to be done, and that will give the association a general understanding of what the sort of what you're in for, what's going to be happening on site, and it gives the contractor a general idea of what to prepare to be ready for. But on the right hand side, we see this is an example pulled from a set of construction documents where you can see everything that's sort of highlighted in red are areas that are clearly identified and marked as these are the areas where repairs are going to happen. And so this is an example of a very clear, well-defined scope of what is to be done. And also, you can't really see it here, but each of those areas is sort of assigned a specific detail, which is, again, very detailed instructions on exactly what work is to be done there and how it should work. So that's sort of a comparison.
I think from a contractor standpoint, one of the things that's important to determine the differentiation between an engineer report and an engineer design is that pricing piece. And Ethan touched on it a little bit, but oftentimes we can develop a ROM or a rough order of magnitude pricing based on the broad recommendations of a report, but we're not able to produce a detailed, complete bid, full bid pricing for that, which is where your contractor would develop that more along the lines of the engineer design phase. So as you move from step 2 into step 3, you start to really develop the project logistics. And the project logistics are really the how the project will be implemented. So if during step 2, you've developed what that repair recommendation is going to be, step 3 is how is your contractor going to be able to implement that, and what are those impacts going to be on your community? And there are 5 key focal points of the project logistics that we recommend all contractors focus on. And that's going to be your safety and security, your quality, your schedule, your cost, and your communication. And if your contractor focuses on these things during the project planning phase and the project implementation phase, we believe that you'll have a successful project. To kind of help walk through some of the steps we've talking about, we've got a case study of a property here in Texas that we worked on. This is a property that RE and SPSA were hired on to help during the planning phase of a more than maintenance project. Now, when we were brought on, the association had identified some severe stucco cracking and leaking around windows and doors. They'd also performed a series of different maintenance efforts to try to solve these problems, including sealing all of the windows and doors to try to stop the leaking in the stucco areas. That particular effort actually made their problem worse. But overall, they'd spent quite a bit of time and effort and money in trying to solve these problems through more of a maintenance approach rather than looking at it and understanding that this was likely a more than a maintenance problem.
I want to take a second. So from personal experience and some free advice for you in terms of building maintenance, if you're being presented with sealant as a fix for a problem, it's a red flag that you're just getting a Band-Aid solution. And that's exactly what happened in this situation. Sealant was applied around windows and doors and along floor lines, and it actually ended up making the problem worse by trapping water where it wasn't supposed to be. After SPSA and RE were engaged in this project, we spent time on site checking things out, taking a look, investigating to see what was really going on. And the original thought had been, that these issues were related to some cracking that was observed in the stucco. And after a sort of more in-depth investigation, we were able to show that it's not exactly related to the stucco cracking. As so often happens with stucco issues, there were issues with the way the stucco and the windows were installed and integrated together. And this is again where we're talking about complex systems, different systems coming together, different interplays of things. And so the way these things were built together, it just wasn't working out. And so we decided, we were able to figure out what was at play in terms of how the stucco and the windows were integrated together. So as we were developing the scope of the repair and what needs to be done, what are we going to do to solve these issues? Well, you could start with, well, the stucco is just not integrated well with the windows. One solution that was on the table is let's clear off all the stucco and put everything back the way it really should be done. And that's sort of represented by what you see here on the left, option 1. What we're able to do when we collaborate between the designer and the contractor is we can explore other options for how else can we do this? How can we do this smarter, more targeted? And so what we were able to do is, because we could identify some of the fundamental issues of what was going wrong between the stucco and the windows, we were able to target specific areas of high importance. And by working together, we were able to identify a way that we could access these areas, fix them without having to strip the entire building of all its stucco. And the implications that have are, I would think, are pretty obvious. Stripping the whole building of the stucco was 5 times higher than what the budget was going to allow for this project, whereas doing a more targeted approach fell within the budget.
I think that this is really a good indication of the overall value of this process in the sense that, without that collaboration, the recommendation, the direction that the association was looking to go in and perhaps the initial recommendation from other contractors or other engineers would be a wholesale replacement. Whereas with the collaboration approach and working to understand what would be best for the community and what those repairs needed to be from a very targeted and focused effort, the project was able to be executed successfully, solving the necessary repairs within budget.
So here what you see is an example of following that process of working out sort of what can we do to target certain issues. This is an image from the construction documents showing how the specific scope, what areas are we going to touch and what are we going to do to them, is identified, memorialized in the contract documents.
So really what we wanted to describe in this first section of the presentation is when you have more than a maintenance issue, there's really some project planning that needs to take place before you can implement a successful project. And you really need to define what that project plan is before you can get apples to apples bids that you can be confident in. So we're going to move to the second part of the presentation, and that's the project implementation. And again, as we kind of said, working in HOA occupied environments are very, very different than any other kind of reconstruction project. And that's because we're working where people live. So this section is really going to be about proper project management and how to make sure you as the board are asking the right questions to your preferred contractor to ensure you're going to have a successful HOA project. So Adam's going to talk about proper supervision.
So one of the really important components to any successful project is determining the proper level of supervision that is going to be necessary for this project. And it's a question we get asked quite frequently is, how do you determine what project supervision should look like on a specific repair project? So real quickly, I want to kind of just identify a couple of roles that are very typical for contractors on these types of projects. So oftentimes you have a foreman, and that foreman is going to be identified as somebody who is on site, kind of a crew leader who's managing the actual crews, more hands-on or bags-on, as we say, performing work and managing individual crews and laborers. The superintendent is going to have a little bit more of a project-wide approach to their role. And they're going to be focused primarily on the safety and security, the quality and the schedule components of the project, and making sure that those are being managed properly, documented, and implemented throughout the process. While the project manager is ultimately the responsible for the project as a whole, managing the other project team members, they're also primarily responsible for the cost and the communication components of the project. One of the other things that we often have to take into consideration is what is the proper time commitment for each of these different project supervisors to have for this project. So your contractor would need to make sure that they look at is there a value to having a full-time personnel or supervisor on the site, or would a part-time be a better fit? So oftentimes you may run into a situation where there's a combination of those two things, where maybe there's a full-time superintendent on site and then a part-time project manager. Or you may run into a project that requires both part-time or both full-time superintendent as well as a full-time project manager. And those things are going to just really vary depending from project to project. But I think one of the things that's really important to understand about the project supervision is that there can be a big impact to the overall cost of the project based on the level of supervision that is required, and the level of supervision applied to a project can really impact the overall quality and cost of a project throughout the duration of the project. So how does a contractor really determine what level of supervision is necessary? So there are a couple of key things that I think most contractors will look at when making these determinations. And number one is the project size and duration. So how long is the project going to last? How many crew members or how many work crews are going to be involved on it? What is the rate of production that's going to be necessary for that project? How big of a footprint will the project have on the community? All of these things kind of help determine the level of proper project supervision. The project complexity can also play a role in that. There are some projects that may have more complex repair scopes that involve multiple trades. And then there are some projects that may have a little bit less complex repair scopes that only involve a couple of trades. There's also projects where there's going to be more complex logistics, working in high rises or working in large communities that have that are spread out. These can also have an impact on the best approach to the project supervision. And engineer involvement can also play a role in determining what that level of supervision needs to be. And this can be looked at through the number of observations, the project submittals, and all of the other requirements that can come with those types of involvements. And then last but certainly not least are the project logistics, and what type of proper project supervision is necessary to really oversee these key logistical challenges on the project. And again, we look at these five key components there: the safety and security, the quality, the schedule, the cost, and the communication. If those things are managed during the project planning stage, as well as during the project implementation stage, you're going to find yourself with a much more successful project. So as we look at those individual project logistics, the safety and security is something that is always going to be really important. And one of the components that is important to plan during the planning portion of a project is the access plan. This is really going to determine how the repair scope is implemented and largely what the impact will be on the community. So the access plan on some projects, again, may be swing stages. It could be, we could be able to access it with a boom lift. In the example here, which is the same as our case study, the access plan was based around the repairs being performed from scaffolding. So during the project planning stage, your contractor should look at understanding how they're going to access it. And if it's going to have scaffolding, does it need to have debris netting? Debris netting can be really important because it's going to provide an additional safety measure to make sure that any debris or material or anything that's coming off of the building or going onto the building is safely contained and reduces any sort of potential fall hazard risk in and around that work area. We also think it's important that your contractor identify overhead protection issues. Again, using this example, there were two areas of overhead protection that needed to be looked at. One was the access to the garage, where people were going to access in and out of the parking garage. And then the other is the access in and out of the front door, where the pedestrians could come and go. Neither of these areas could realistically be closed during the repair. So we had to take into consideration how to properly and safely allow residents to access those areas. Things like safety fencing, sidewalk closures, ground spotters are all things that your contractor should really take into consideration during the planning phase. One of the other important considerations is the staging area. In this particular example, the staging area was on the other side of the street, but we needed to manage how that material was going to get managed to and from the project, where this material was going to be stored, if there's going to be an on-site office, if there's going to be portalets, where all of these things are going to be is important to be planned, and those expectations set with you and your community on the front end of the project. Under our safety and security pillar, we think it's really important to focus on the security. As contractors who work only and primarily in occupied environments like your communities, we want your residents and everybody in the community to feel safe during the process. And a couple of the things that we've seen contractors successfully implement are sign-in and sign-out sheets, security badges that are color-coded, safety vests that are color-coded, these types of things to ensure that nobody is coming onto the site or leaving the site or having any access to your community without prior authorization, and that we can track who's going to be on the site and in what areas on a daily basis. Moving into the quality component, I think it's really important, again, from a planning perspective as well as an implementation perspective, that your contractor really focus on how they're going to manage the quality control on the project. So we have this is an example of a QA/QC plan that your contractor would want to produce before the project starts to identify how that quality is going to be managed, what those expectations are, how it's going to be signed off, who's going to be inspecting things, and what all of those expectations are. And this is a huge component to managing quality throughout the project. From a schedule standpoint, there are a lot of different tools that your contractor can use to manage the schedule on the project. There's what we refer to as a critical path method schedule, or a CPM. There's a 3-week schedule. We utilize phasing plans at times. So the schedule is really important because, as we all know, time is money, and setting clear expectations on the front end and making sure that the project is planned appropriately allows for the project to run smoothly and your community and all of your residents to have a thorough understanding and expectation of what that schedule is going to be and what their impact is going to be. The phasing plan that we're looking at, it identifies kind of where we're going to be from a footprint standpoint, so which units or which residents would be affected. It gives approximate durations, and it really identifies the flow of the overall project so that it is a kind of a snapshot of what that schedule looks like. And then typically your contractor will have a more detailed schedule to kind of back that up with as well.
All right, that brings us to communication. And working in occupied environments, communication is one of the most important things to plan for. So your contractor should really be the driving force in helping your property manager communicate effectively to your residents, because they have all of the important project information. So that being said, there should be a specific protocol to specifically communicate with your board, you as your board and your property manager. So these are things like attending the monthly HOA meetings, potentially holding weekly meetings specifically with the board and the property manager if it's a larger project, and then sending weekly construction updates. So it's important for you as the board to set the expectations with your contractor before the project starts as to what level of communication you expect to have with them. The other thing that is really, really important is community communication and how your contractor is going to help your property manager communicate directly with your residents. It's really important that your residents know what to expect and how to prepare for upcoming construction. So we have kind of a macro and a micro communication broken down. So macro communication is really reaching a bunch of your residents at once. These are things like doing a town hall meeting where you invite all of your residents to a big presentation to meet your project team, to go over what to expect and how to prepare. Utilizing community notices, actually posting notices to doors, utilizing any community bulletin boards for notices. And then some contractors also have a custom project website where your community members can log into that website and get real-time updates on your project. And then there's a micro approach to communication as well, and that's things like individual resident consultations. If your contractor is going to be directly in someone's unit, they probably need to have an individual resident consultation to go over how their unit is going to be impacted. Also things like 24-hour emergency response systems and access to the on-site staff. These are all communication protocols that your contractor should be establishing with the board before the project starts. Again, it's really, really important to make sure your community members are comfortable with our construction crews being on site. So those 5 things that we just talked about, safety and security, quality, schedule, cost, and communication, really are what make projects successful in the HOA realm. So if they're planned and implemented correctly, you're going to save time and you're going to save money during the project, and it's going to be reduced impact for your residents. So I'm going to turn it over to Ethan, and he's going to talk a little bit about the engineer's value through construction.
Thanks, Alyssa. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to try and make my audio a little bit easier to hear. Okay. 1 second. And difficulties. We are going to move forward. So anyway, value throughout construction. So just because the engineer or the architect has put their stamp on the repair design drawings does not mean that their involvement in the project necessarily needs to be over. There's a lot of benefit to the sort of involvement that the designer has had throughout the process in getting the job across the finish line. So these are a few examples of some of those things, and we will just sort of dive into a few of them right now. One of the first things that the engineer can work on once the design has been done is the submittal process. And the submittal process is where the contractor submits for approval different material, all the materials that are going to be used on the project. And it's the designer's job to sort of specify all the materials and what's going to be used. The contractor's expertise is in how much those materials cost and their availability and things like that. And so through the submittal process, there's an advantage to being able to sort of give each other feedback, work together on possibly finding alternate materials that are more cost effective, and making sure that if there is a choice made to choose a different material, that it still meets the requirements of the design. Another component of sort of the ongoing involvement that the designer can have is to work with the contractor for RFIs, which RFI stands for Request for Information. And RFIs are commonplace throughout any construction project, but on a repair project, a repair project is particularly prone to surprises coming up or unanticipated things that need to get addressed. So the designer can help be a problem solver for how to address unanticipated questions that come up throughout the repair process. And so what we have here is an example of an issue that is identified in the field that was not anticipated, and the sort of the design team's turnaround response for this is how we're going to address this issue. And the benefit of this formalized RFI process is it keeps a record of all the decisions that were made and changes throughout the process, which can be beneficial for record keeping, and also you as as property owners and as the association, you have a record of what happened when, and it helps to keep a log of what's going on. For the submittals, you have a record of all of the products, all the materials that are used on site, which can always be helpful down the road, especially during maintenance issues, when maintenance comes up. So another element that the design team can do is to work as a owner's representative, sort of to keep an eye out for the ownership, in representing the ownership. To look at payment applications, change estimates, and change orders, just to sort of make sure that change orders are reasonable, that the payment applications are proceeding apace with actual progress of the repairs. It's sort of an element of checks and balances to give peace of mind to the association. Another element of peace of mind for the association, and was something that was referred to in the QA/QC section that Adam was just talking about, is observations. The engineer, the designer, is intimately familiar at this point with the repair design and what needs to happen. So they can be engaged to do periodic observations to make sure that the work that's being performed conforms to the intent of the repair design. So observations can be performed and followed up with reports to sort of document that, yes, what's going on out there complies with the design. Occasionally there might be issues where something needs to be addressed, and there can be a formalized process for how to identify problems and get them addressed in the field during construction, so that they don't hold up the process and it doesn't have to be done later. And then one more sort of element of what we can do is issue a letter of substantial completion, which is a certification that the repairs have been carried out fully, and gives closure and another sense of peace of mind to the association that things have been carried through all the way. And speaking of closure, that sort of brings us to the conclusion of the sort of main part of our presentation. I guess, Matt, we'll turn back to you for the next stage.
All right, thank you guys. So we have a couple questions, two really similar questions around change orders. So the first question is, we've had a number of change orders during a recent roof project. How common are change orders, and when should someone's antenna, if you will, be up on additional fees?
That is a really great question. One of the biggest things we get asked about actually is change orders. So Adam, I'm going to kick this one to you.
Sure, absolutely. Through the project planning and really all of the effort that goes into the planning that we just talked about should reduce or eliminate the need for change orders. But a lot of times, if there are things that come up that truly cannot be foreseen or allocated for at the beginning of the project, then there could be a need for change orders. I don't know that there's necessarily a kind of a red line, if you will, but I feel like a lot of times we would look at, say, if a project has a contingency amount of 10% or something like that, depending on the scope of work, if the change orders are to exceed that type of amount, then I would say you might want to have that antenna go up a little bit.
Really quick before we move to the next question, Adam, can you kind of describe an example of a known unknown?
Absolutely. So there are times where we'll look at things and we'll say there are things that we truly don't know about, and then there are known unknowns. And when we define or talk about a known unknown, what we mean is we recognize that there's a high likelihood that there's going to be a condition, but we don't know exactly to the extent. A good example would be, if we're working on a building envelope or a stucco project, let's say, and we understand that there's going to be damage or deterioration to the sheathing of the building, and that sheathing is going to need to be replaced during the repair project, but we just don't know to the full extent of how many times we're going to run into that condition or how many square feet we're going to identify. We would identify that particular condition as a known unknown. And again, during the bidding process, we would want to try to allocate an allowance for that. So we could say, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we would say that we expect it to be approximately this much so that we can allocate those budget dollars on the front end rather than have them come up later and then be surprised by them.
And I'd like to just add, we described a collaborative approach to this process, starting with getting the team together and collaboration in the design phase. And in our experience, we found that the more that the contractor and the designer can interact and work together in the beginning, the more or the fewer change orders you see down the road. And so there are other approaches to dealing with a project like this. And one of them is called design, bid, build. And essentially that's, you engage a designer at the beginning of the project and they stamp their product, and then you bid it, and then you turn it over to a builder. And without that collaboration in between the two, what you get is a lot of questions and unanticipated issues that come up. That those are the things that can result in scope change and change orders. And so this is one of the reasons why we like to engage in this collaborative design, build and construction approach.
So a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I want to can we expand on that for just a moment while we're on the topic of change orders? So is there, in your experience, either Ethan, Adam, or Alyssa, is there a percentage of the contract that is considered normal for change orders? I mean, because they're inevitable, right? I think we all understand that to a degree. But I don't know. So the question is, what would be considered normal? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 25%? Like when do we hit that excessive threshold?
I think, what we would look at as a kind of a typical range would be at the 5 to 10% range.
Okay. So changing gears away from change orders, at least for right now, when it comes to actually binding a contract for the scope of work that has been developed, what's the best practice here? Should associations be consulting with legal? Like, is that another step in the process? It's something that wasn't touched on tonight, but I think something that should be addressed. These are often large scale projects, sometimes capital improvement projects. So should attorneys be involved in that review?
We typically say yes. It's just an added layer of protection for both the HOA and for us as the contractor. So having your general counsel review those construction agreements is a really good idea. And I will say firms that work specifically with HOAs should have a pretty good understanding of what those contracts are. And typically your general counsel should be exposed to these as well. And we work directly with general counsels all the time to get these HOA contracts lined out on behalf of the HOA.
Okay. We do the same thing. Before we engage in a contract, we have it, approved by our in-house counsel, and we would expect we don't begrudge an association. We actually encourage an association to do the same.
So on the topic of legal documents then, Ethan, I think early on in the presentation this evening, you had mentioned that the documents you provide can be used as legal documents. So have you, maybe you personally, but SPSA, I'm sure, can you speak to experiences working through legal situations, be it an insurance claim, a defect claim, whatever it might be? Like, is that what you were referring to? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So SPSA also has a considerable amount of experience dealing with construction defect litigation issues. We serve as expert witness for in a construction defect case. And in that process, when there is a dispute, some litigation or things like that, the construction documents can be used as a reference for this is what was intended to be there. And a lot of times, what we'll do is if there is a dispute or if there's something, you can go back and say, does what was done match what was intended to be there? And those construction documents do carry a lot of weight in determining what was supposed to have been done and who needs to do what to make it right. The construction documents play a big part in that.
And I think, not to put words in, I think that he was also, trying to point out early on is that these construction documents can really help provide some liability or reduce the liability of the association by providing clear direction and clear expectations during the bidding and the contracting process. So I think that there's a significant liability factor in having the engineer involved in those decisions and those design aspects.
Excellent, thank you. So changing gears to the operational side of things for a moment. Sometimes I think the hardest part is identifying or recognizing, if you will, when it becomes more than maintenance, right? So there might be a leak here, there might be a leak there, and over the course of a couple of years, you're just kind of chasing or putting band-aids on things without recognizing it's more than maintenance. And maybe a leak isn't the best example here, but at what stage are we saying this is more than maintenance? We need to call Ethan or we need to call RE. Like, when are we making that call?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And if as a contractor, if your contractor comes out or your association is dealing with things, I would say even more than once, you need to be aware of it. If you try to perform a maintenance task on something and it comes back even once, you should start looking at it and saying, well, why didn't that work? What's the root cause of this, and why didn't the effort and the maintenance repair that we've implemented solve the problem? So I would say if it happens once, start thinking about it. If it happens a second time, then it's very likely that you've got an underlying issue that's not something that's going to be addressed successfully on a maintenance level.
Really, the earlier we can kind of catch some of these things, the better, because the longer these things go, the more costly those repairs are going to be. Mm-hmm. So the earlier we can catch something and the earlier we can help the HOA work through some of this stuff, the better.
I was being flip a little while ago when I said if sealant is the repair, that's a red flag. But I mean, there is some truth to it, and you may see that your typical maintenance staff just might not fully understand what's going on, right? And if there's some head scratching and some what is really going on here, that's where you can bring in other people like an engineer or a contractor who understand the systems at play behind what's going on to help you sort of solve that problem.
So when we recognize that situation, are we calling Reconstruction Experts or other first, or are we calling an engineer first? I think that's also something that...
That's also a really good question. I think it could probably go either way.
It has gone both ways.
Yeah, I think it can go both ways. And if your contractor or your engineer is being upfront with you, they're gonna say, you need a contractor involved or you need an engineer involved. Mm-hmm. So either way, I think is a good approach.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There have been times where I've been called out to look at things, and I've said this is something that you should have an engineer involved in, and then there's other times where maybe that's not as necessary. But I certainly think that if you have a trusted partner from an engineering firm or a trusted partner from a contractor, that they're going to be honest and give you good advice at that point.
And so most of the best practices you all have shared tonight apply. We talked a lot about reconstruction or preventative maintenance or identifying things that are more than maintenance, like we had talked about. But does this also apply to enhancements, like whether it's additions or, yeah? Can you all want to speak to that at all?
Absolutely. If there's capital improvement type projects, then a lot of the same exact types of planning processes and procedures and things like that would need to be implemented in order to ensure a successful project. So I think capital improvements or additions or any of those types of things absolutely fall in the same wheelhouse.
Really, the goal of the planning process, whether it's capital improvement or reconstruction, is to just prepare the HOA on, cost, time frame, and resident impact. And those are huge to do upfront, no matter what the project is.
And we sort of divide this into 3 different sections. We have repair, rehabilitation, and new construction or new design. And the difference between repair and rehabilitation is repair is when something is wrong and it needs to be fixed. And rehabilitation is if you have a 40-year-old property and it's just worn out and nothing was done wrong. There's nothing, but it's just all that needs to be redone. That would be rehabilitation. So we differentiate between all 3, but essentially it's the same amount of sort of attention to, a living project, a living site.
So we have like 2 minutes, so let's squeeze in one more question. And Alyssa, you had mentioned resident impact. So that's obviously the #1 concern on most of these projects. So as earlier in the presentation, you had mentioned some things such as, I think you called it like a custom project website or a resident portal, community portal. Like, what does that look like? What does your communication look like to just basically over communicate? Is that on the management company? Is that on the board? Is that on, what do you suggest, recommend here?
So I think I touched on it a little bit. It really should be the contractor driving that communication because we're the ones that have all of that information. So those communication approaches that I showed are actually all things that Reconstruction Experts does, and we do all of them on every project. So again, doing macro levels of communication, doing micro levels of communication, it's all really important. Specifically related to the custom website, again, this is something that RE does, but it is a website portal through our website where residents or a community has one login and they can log into that, and our project staff actually updates that every Friday. So they get schedule updates, they get any important information that our project team thinks they need to know. So again, I think it's a weekly communication, it's posting notices, it's hitting the residents, if you will, from every angle as much as you possibly can.
Okay. Well, that takes us right up to the hour. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to say, Ethan, Adam, and Alyssa, thank you very much for presenting this evening. And then to all of our attendees, on behalf of Worth Ross and the entire Worth Ross team and leadership, thank you all for attending again. Nicole will be in touch with some follow-up information, the presentation, probably a survey, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you so much,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.